Shut them up, now. They are so loud. I was happily living with my husband and my sweet mother-in-law, but things changed after our daughter was born. Our daughter cried at night, and I started getting yelled at and treated coldly. One day, while my husband was swamped with work at home, our suddenly crying daughter went silent in just the brief moment I looked away. But she wasn't just sleeping. She woke up convulsing. After taking her to the emergency room and hearing the doctor's diagnosis, I decided to get a divorce. My name is Michelle Stevens. I'm a 28-year-old stay-at-home mom. I live with my husband, John, our daughter, Emily, and my mother-in-law, making it a family of 4. I met John 6 years ago at my former job. We were hired at the same time and worked in the same department. From the beginning, I was impressed with his innovative ideas, which didn't seem like they came from someone who started at the same time as me. I was curious about what kind of person he was. He was different from our colleagues. He seemed a bit odd and kept to himself. But when I approached him, I realized he was an interesting guy, though a bit unique. For example, because he loves his job and constantly thinks of new ideas, he has a routine meal plan to avoid deciding what to eat for lunch. It's like, Monday is curry, Tuesday is ramen, Wednesday is grilled fish, and so on. So it wasn't that he didn't like spending time with colleagues, but he ate alone to stick to his routine. All I had to do was adjust my lunch schedule to his, and spending time with him became easy. Though we often talked about work when we were together, I learned a lot, and I enjoyed our conversations. He had some other quirks because he's so dedicated to his job, but I found them endearing. I was the one who confessed my feelings and said, "Let's date." He laughed and replied, "I was gonna ask you out soon." Our relationship didn't change much after we started dating. We didn't go on typical romantic dates. Instead, we often ate lunch together and discussed our work projects. However, for the first time since we began dating, he introduced me to his mother. He didn't like spending time on household chores because it took away from his work, so he lived with his mother. From what I heard, his family background was complicated. His parents divorced when he was 10. John stayed with his mother, and his younger sister, who was just a baby, went with their father. He hadn't had any contact with his father or sister since then. I was bracing myself for a very protective mother, but when I met her, she was a wonderful person. Unlike the reserved John, she was talkative and cheerful. She treated me just as warmly as she did her son. Sometimes when John was too busy with work, she and I would go out together. I got along really well with both John and his mother. 3 years into our relationship, after John proposed, his mother jokingly said, "If John's getting married, I guess I should move out." To which I eagerly replied, "I'd be upset if you did. Living with you is one of the reasons I said yes to the proposal. If you're okay with it, please stay with us." She laughed and said, "You sure about that? I might be hard on you." I laughed it off, saying, "Bring it on." John, watching us, laughed too. For the next 2 years, we lived together without any problems. She took care of all the household chores for John and me, who were both working. Even when I offered to help, she would say, "You must be tired, let me handle it," and she'd do everything herself. Occasionally, on weekends when John was busy working from home, she and I would cook or bake together, which was always fun. John remained dedicated to his job even after we got married. I believe our home was cheerful thanks to his mother, and I was grateful for that. Things started to change when I discovered I was pregnant. 2 years into our marriage, I felt unwell, and at the advice of John's mother, I went to a doctor, who confirmed my pregnancy. John was thrilled when I told him, but his mother's reaction was lukewarm. Considering how she always rejoiced in our happy moments more than we did, I sensed something was amiss. That night, in our bedroom, I asked John about it. He explained, Mom, she had postpartum depression after my sister was born. Dad was working in a different city at the time, so she had to take care of both of us by herself. It must have been tough. One day, she left the house with just me. I haven't seen my sister or dad since then. I regretted being so thoughtless and hurting her feelings. I didn't know there was such a backstory. If I'd known, I would have told John first and thought more about how to break the news to her. Seeing my disappointment, John smiled and said, "It's been almost 20 years since then. She'll be fine." Just as my husband said, my mother-in-law didn't change a bit from the next day onward. If anything, she became even more concerned about my health, preparing meals with even more attention to ensure I was getting all the necessary nutrients, and accompanying me to the hospital in my husband's place among many other things. Feeling reassured by her, I decided to give birth here instead of going back to my parents' house. Initially, I had thought about having the baby at my parents' house, but it was in the countryside and quite far away, so the idea of looking for a hospital there and preparing to go back seemed like too much of a hassle. Luckily, my mother-in-law said, "I'll help you out," and I was able to give birth safely. I think I will never forget the moment my daughter, Emily, was born. She had already been precious to me while in my belly, but the moment I saw her face for the first time, I felt an overwhelming surge of affection and could unconditionally vow to protect her no matter what, and make her happy. Both my husband and my mother-in-law were happy about Emily's birth, and I think that was the happiest time of my life. However, that happiness gradually started to crumble. After bringing Emily home from the hospital, I took a year-long maternity leave, thinking that I would help with childcare and household chores. But my mother-in-law said, "I've always taken care of the house, and that's not going to change. You don't need to worry about it." True to her word, she took care of various things around the house as she always did, but she wouldn't get involved with Emily. I even felt an atmosphere as if she was deliberately avoiding her. My mother-in-law, who always listened attentively to what I had to say, would give vague responses or pretend not to hear when the topic of Emily came up. I was saddened by my mother-in-law's behavior, which seemed like she was ignoring my daughter, but I couldn't speak up strongly because I knew about her past. Even after 6 months since Emily was born, my mother-in-law remained the same. By this time, Emily could perfectly distinguish between people's faces, recognizing her father, who didn't have much time to interact with her due to work, and would smile at him. My husband still prioritized work, but when he had the time, he would talk to Emily and try to communicate with her, so he was delighted that she started smiling at him. Around that time, Emily started having episodes of night crying. I haven't seen many other children, so I'm not sure, but I think Emily's night crying was on the severe side. She would cry non-stop for 2 to 3 hours in the middle of the night quite frequently. I felt sorry for my husband and my mother-in-law waking up because of it, so I tried to soothe Emily in the living room or the bathroom, as far away from the bedroom as possible. However, since our house was not that big, they could still hear her. The number of times my husband and my mother-in-law mentioned that it was loud last night had increased. Although my husband is one thing, my mother-in-law usually never complained about anything, so I think this was probably the first complaint she ever made to me. I tried my best to soothe Emily, but her night crying didn't stop. Gradually, my husband and my mother-in-law seemed to become more irritable, and their way of speaking became more and more rough, saying things like, "It's so noisy," and "Make her stop crying." At the end of that year, there was an important planning meeting at my husband's company. Whether his project idea would be accepted at this meeting would determine if he would be entrusted with a project in the next fiscal year. It was that kind of meeting. Knowing how important this meeting was, I planned to go back to my parents' house for 2 nights and 3 days starting 2 days before the meeting, so that my husband's work wouldn't be disrupted by Emily's night crying. I was being considerate in my own way. However, things didn't go as planned. In fact, I ended up going back to my parents' house even sooner. It was the weekend, less than a week before my husband's presentation, and he was working on his proposal at home. I had planned to go out so as not to disturb him, but it was raining heavily that day. Since I didn't have a driver's license, I hesitated to go out with Emily. If we went out in the heavy rain of December, Emily would surely catch a cold, that's what I thought. Reluctantly, I stayed at home, paying extra attention to not let Emily cry. However, she suddenly started crying. She had just had her milk, and her diaper was clean. I was playing with her while holding her, and I didn't understand why she started crying. Trying to keep the crying sound from reaching my husband as much as possible, I moved with Emily to the bathroom, the furthest place from the bedroom where my husband was working, and tried desperately to soothe her. But Emily wouldn't stop crying. Then, my husband opened the door of the bedroom and shouted, "It's too noisy. Make her stop crying now." This way of speaking was unthinkable from the husband I knew when we first got married, but this was pretty much what he had been like recently. I understand that work is important, but I thought he didn't have to speak in such a manner. I was so careful, and yet Emily started crying, and I got yelled at by my husband. I felt like crying myself, thinking. But I thought that once my husband gets a break from work, things would go back to normal. And my daughter Emily, she'll stop crying someday, right? So I tried desperately to hold back my tears. I had just fed her, thinking that I needed to do something, but then I decided to give Emily another bottle of milk. I thought, maybe if she's full, she might just fall asleep. Unfortunately, since I physically can't produce breast milk, I had no choice but to boil water and prepare formula. I couldn't just leave Emily in the bathroom while I made it, so I brought her to the living room and laid her down in the crib. My mother-in-law, who was there in the living room, frowned as Emily continued to cry and said, "Hey, when is she going to stop crying? John can't concentrate on his work, and I can't stand this noise anymore." Recently, my husband John and my mother-in-law have been acting like this. She helps with housework and talks to me, but when it comes to Emily, she doesn't touch her, and if she does, she just complains. That's how my mother-in-law has been lately. I apologized to my mother-in-law and asked her to watch Emily for a bit. I went to the kitchen and quickly prepared the milk. Even then, I could hear Emily's piercing cries. But by the time the water had cooled down and the milk was ready, the crying had suddenly stopped. I knew it. My mother-in-law did it. She got Emily to stop crying. I was touched. When I returned to the living room, just as I thought, Emily was asleep. My mother-in-law was sitting on the sofa, reading a book. When I thanked her, saying, "You're really something else. There's nothing like the touch of someone who has raised kids before," she responded, "I suppose," but she seemed somewhat brusque. I felt a slight discomfort with her response, but I was relieved that we weren't disturbing John, so I didn't pay it much mind. However, Emily did not wake up even after about 3 hours. If this continues, she won't be able to sleep at night and might start crying again. That's what I thought, so I decided to wake her up. But even when I called to her, Emily wouldn't open her eyes. When I tapped her lightly on the shoulder, she opened her eyes, but she seemed dazed, and her eyes weren't focusing properly. She was acting different from when she is usually groggy after a nap. I became worried and consulted my mother-in-law, telling her that something seemed off with Emily, but without even looking at her, she said, "It's probably just your imagination. She'll be fine." I believed my mother-in-law's words and waited for a while, but Emily's eyes never focused. Scared, I went to my husband John, who was working in the bedroom. "I know you're busy, but can you take out the car? Something's wrong with Emily. She seems completely out of it. It's strange. I'm worried. I want to take her to the hospital, please." I pleaded desperately, but John, seemingly annoyed, said, "Are you sure it's not just your imagination? What does my mom say?" "Your mom says she's fine, but she's clearly not okay to me." "If mom says she's fine, then she must be okay. I need to finish this today, don't bother me." "But I'm really worried." When I said this, John raised his voice, "Give me a break. Can't you see I'm working? I thought she finally stopped crying, and now you want to go to the hospital? Don't be ridiculous." I was so stunned by my husband's outburst that I couldn't say anything. Then, turning back to his computer, John muttered, "I never wanted a kid in the first place." His words still ring in my ears to this day. I couldn't believe my ears. It was unthinkable for John to say something like that. But I definitely saw him say it. I couldn't stop crying from the shock. I never thought John would say something like that. I left the bedroom, still crying, but when I saw Emily, my tears dried up. She was having convulsions. I thought something was wrong. Just a moment ago, Emily seemed perfectly fine, she didn't look ill at all. Panicking, I called a taxi and rushed to the emergency room. I couldn't stop trembling at the thought of something happening to Emily. When we arrived at the hospital, a pediatrician saw us right away. "There's a possibility of shaken baby syndrome," he said, and decided to do a CT scan on Emily. I didn't know about the disease, so I frantically looked it up while I was in the waiting room. Shaken baby syndrome is apparently a condition where a baby, whose neck muscles are still undeveloped, suffers brain damage due to being violently shaken. I learned that in severe cases, it could lead to death, which made my blood run cold. For a while, I was stunned and couldn't think about anything else. I don't know how much time had passed, but I was called in because the doctor wanted to discuss the results of the examination. Fortunately, Emily doesn't have any hematoma, and she's calmed down now since we've given her an anticonvulsant. The doctor said, bringing me relief. However, the doctor then said something unbelievable. "But, Mom, when the nurse was undressing Emily for the examination, she found marks on her neck and shoulders that looked like they were made by an adult's fingers." I don't mean to be rude, but have you ever abused your daughter? I didn't understand what he was implying. Shaken baby syndrome is a condition that occurs when a baby is shaken vigorously. It can happen while trying to comfort them, or during play when they're being tossed in the air, and things unfortunately go wrong. We were thinking that might be the cause, but looking at those marks, it's also possible someone intentionally shook her quite hard. The doctor continued in a matter-of-fact tone. "If you don't remember anything, it could have been another family member. We were able to treat her in time this round, and there was no hematoma, so she's fine. But if the same thing happens again, we can't guarantee Emily will be safe. I think you should have a serious talk with your family." I couldn't get the doctor's words out of my head even after I left the examination room. I have never abused my daughter, and I've never seen any signs of abuse on her. There were no marks on her when I changed her diaper and dressed her earlier today. I could only think that my mother-in-law must have done something while I was making Emily's milk. Emily would need to stay in the hospital for about 3 days just to be safe, so I decided to go home to get the things we needed. "Did you do something to Emily?" I asked my mother-in-law in a trembling voice when I got back home. Then, my mother-in-law responded, "What?" I didn't do anything, in a clearly suspicious manner. Usually, she would ask, "What do you mean? What happened? Did something happen?" But this time, she just denied it without asking anything. "Tell me the truth." As I yelled and confronted her, she finally admitted it. I just grabbed and shook her a little because she was being too noisy. "A little? The doctor said there were severe marks on her neck and shoulders. Because of what you did, Emily was in serious danger." When I said that, my mother-in-law responded nonchalantly, "Danger? But she's fine now, right? So what's the big deal?" "What? How can you say that?" I raised my voice, and at that moment, my husband came out of the bedroom. "Shut up, both of you. Keep it down," he said before slamming the door shut with a loud bang. I had sent him a message earlier, telling him that Emily was having seizures and we were going to the hospital, but he didn't ask about her condition and just complained about the noise. My husband, who did not seem remorseful at all for putting our daughter in danger. And my mother-in-law, who was unapologetic and casual about the whole situation. I had thought we had a good relationship, but it turned out I was wrong. That moment was when I lost all affection for them and gave up on this family. And then I hurriedly grabbed the bags for the hospital stay and my own belongings and left the house. Luckily, I had planned to return to my parents' house, so I had travel luggage ready and I grabbed that. In the taxi heading to the hospital where my daughter Emily was, I made up my mind to get a divorce. Some might think this is an overreaction, but for me, it was a big deal. Of course, I was furious at my mother-in-law's actions, but the main cause was my husband's behavior. I do think my husband's job is tough. The upcoming planning meeting, whether he gets selected or not, would change how fulfilling his work is for the next fiscal year. But that's not the kind of job you continue doing, neglecting the fact that your daughter has to go to the ER and is hospitalized. It's not a life-threatening job, nor is it a job that only he can do. It's about whether he becomes the project leader or the assistant. Yet, I was fed up with my husband, who is the only father Emily has, for not coming to us, let alone asking about her condition. 3 days after the admission, Emily was safely discharged from the hospital. Intending to divorce my husband, I did not return home but went to my parents' house. My husband and mother-in-law were supposed to visit my parents' house from that day, so they probably didn't think anything of it when I didn't show up. They didn't contact me. Back at my parents' house, I told them what had happened. My mom hugged Emily and me, crying, and after my dad angrily slammed his fist on the desk, he said, "You don't have to go back there. Stay here with us. I'll protect you and Emily." I broke down in tears at his words. After that, my parents and I started looking into divorce. With our layman's research, all we could understand was that divorce seemed difficult. My mother-in-law's actions weren't continuous, so it couldn't be considered abuse. If the other party contested the divorce, it seemed like it would be difficult even if it went to mediation. So, I decided to play hardball. On the 3rd day at my parents' house, I received a message from my husband, John, saying, "The presentation went well, so come back home. Let's celebrate its success." Irritated by his carefree attitude, I decided to go back home once to talk about divorce. I didn't want Emily to see John or my mother-in-law ever again, so I asked my mom to keep her at my parents' house. When I got home, John, surprised that I came back alone, finally asked, "Where's Emily? Is she still in the hospital? Is she that sick?" "Emily has been discharged. She's at my parents' house now. Why didn't you bring her back with you?" "I want a divorce." Both John and my mother-in-law were stunned. "What? Emily was safe this time. But what if you had shaken her more violently? If I hadn't noticed and left it be, Emily might not have made it. Thinking about it, I'm scared of you. Anne." I tried to continue pointing out John's issues when he interrupted me. "If you are scared of my mom, we can live separately. So please reconsider the divorce." At his words, my mother-in-law confronted him, saying, "What? You'd choose Emily over me?" Ignoring her, John said to me, "See? Isn't that okay?" I continued what I was saying earlier. "No. I am disappointed in you, John. I can't believe you said, 'I never wanted kids,' and I'm disappointed that you prioritized your job over our daughter's life. Whether we live separately from your mom or not, I can only think of divorce." When I said that, John grabbed my hand. "No way! I was out of my mind back then because of work. I love you and Emily. I apologize, so please don't talk about divorce. I think words and actions under pressure reveal true feelings, so I can't trust you anymore. I won't divorce you even if it comes to mediation." His words made my heart race. This would be bad for me if it went to mediation. It would be difficult to accuse his mother of abuse and use it as a reason for divorce, as I had researched at my parents' house. So, I decided to tell them a lie that I had thought of at that moment. "I don't mind if it goes to mediation. But if it does, your mother might get arrested for abuse. Just be prepared for that." "What do you mean by abuse?" His mother, who approached me with a frightening face, had no resemblance to the mother-in-law I used to like. I was suspected of abuse at the hospital. I told them I didn't do it, and I got a medical certificate. The marks on Emily's neck are also photographed. If I can prove that these hands belong to your mother, the abuse will be proven. If John insists on going through divorce mediation, I will submit the medical certificate and photos. In reality, this method had almost no effect. Even if it could be proven, it might not be considered abuse if they realized it was just a one-time incident. However, they seemed to believe it. "That would be a problem. Please think it over again. I have no intention of reconsidering. Besides, if you're going to file for mediation, I will comply, but I will make sure the dates are on weekdays. Can you prioritize us over your important work? John flinched when I said this. His mother was constantly begging him, "Hey, John. Please divorce her. I'm gonna get caught." For a while, John was silent, deep in thought. I added, "I will use any means necessary to divorce you. Even if it goes to mediation, even if your mother gets arrested, and even if you have to take time off work, it won't change the fact that we are getting divorced. If that's fine with you, go ahead." After thinking for a while longer, John reluctantly agreed to the divorce. Throughout the discussions about property division and child support, John repeatedly asked, "You're kidding, right? And can't you reconsider?" But I ignored all of it. In the end, we agreed to divide the assets in half and set the child support at $400 per month. My husband was reluctant to agree to the divorce until the very end, but it seemed like he finally realized my stance wasn't going to change, so he reluctantly agreed. I told him, "Feel free to dispose of all my belongings," and then I left the house. I had no intention of taking anything from that house with me. We had furniture at my parents' house, and I didn't want to remember anything about this house. As I left through the front door, I could hear John and his mother arguing. "It's all your fault, Mom. John, you said you didn't want Emily either, right? This is what you get." "What did you say?" "I covered for you so you wouldn't get caught. If you hadn't done that, we wouldn't have had to go to the hospital, and I wouldn't have had to hear all this. It's all your fault. I don't want Michelle to leave. I want you to leave." Later, I heard through the grapevine that John and his mother had separated. Apparently, they had been fighting nonstop since the incident. They were blaming each other for the divorce. Since the apartment was in John's name, his mother was kicked out and is now working in a cleaning job, being bossed around by people more than 20 years her junior. It's been a year since then, and Emily is growing up safely without any lingering effects. She's starting to learn words, calling me Mom and even saying Grandpa and Grandma. She's getting better at many things every day. My mother is looking after her, allowing me to rejoin the workforce at a local company. With my previous experience, I was placed in the planning department, but unlike John, I prioritize my family over work. I've heard about John's situation through former colleagues. Apparently, he struggled with living alone, couldn't concentrate on his work, and the project he proposed started to fail. Eventually, John was removed as project leader and was transferred from the planning department to human resources. It's quite the ironic story. My husband, who was so devoted, got taken off the planning department, and I, who have been prioritizing our family, got assigned to it. Moreover, my work is going really well. When I brainstorm with my daughter on my lap, a ton of great ideas come to me, and I'm able to write excellent project proposals. Not just in terms of work, my personal life has also been flourishing recently. There's this single father from my workplace, and things are going pretty well between us. We first hit it off talking about our kids and have become good friends since. On weekends, we take our kids to parks or amusement parks. His 3-year-old son has taken a liking to me, and he plays with my daughter too. He's also kind to my daughter, so I want to keep seeing him. I've just got divorced, so I'm not thinking about remarrying right away, but if things continue to go well, I hope someday I might become his wife. My wife will be gone by tomorrow. During our honeymoon, I woke up in the middle of the night to overhear my husband secretly having a terrifying conversation on the phone. Trembling with fear, I dared to peek into his smartphone to find out what he was talking about. What I found was beyond belief. Knowing of my husband's plan, I took his passport and flew back to the States on my own. As I was planning to utterly destroy him, someone suddenly approached me. My name is Karen. I'm just an ordinary office worker in New York. I met my husband, Brian, through mutual friends. We hit it off after a few dinners out, and after dating for a year, we just recently got married. Brian is handsome and has a really kind personality, but there was one major problem. This happened one day just before our wedding. I'm home. Normally, Brian gets home from work later than I do, but on this day, I had to work late, so I got home after him. As I walked in and was about to take off my shoes, I noticed something odd. Were these shoes always here? There were not only Brian's work shoes, but also a pair of women's heels. Could he be cheating? I thought. Listening carefully, I could hear muffled voices. It was a man and a woman talking, and I immediately recognized Brian's voice. I couldn't make out the entire conversation, but I could hear a woman's voice laughing along. In the spur of the moment, I started recording with my smartphone and burst into the living room. Huh? There was Brian and my mother-in-law. Oh, welcome back. Karen, welcome home. Sorry for intruding. Relieved that it wasn't an affair, the living room scene was still quite bizarre. Boxes were piled up everywhere. Confused, I asked, "What's with all these boxes?" Brian responded, "Oh, these? We're moving." My mom came over to help pack. I was so confused I felt like my brain might explode. Moving? Where to? I never heard about this. Oh, Brian. You didn't tell Karen? Sorry, I've been so busy with work. I'm so sorry, Karen. I told him if you're gonna get married, you should move into our house. It looks like Brian didn't mention it to you. Live in her house? I was more confused than ever. I was looking forward to starting our newlywed life together, just the two of us. This is a huge deal. I have to put a stop to this. So, I said, I haven't been told anything about this. I can't just agree to something decided without me. But then they said, it's normal for newlyweds to live with their in-laws, you know? If you can't, maybe you should reconsider the marriage. Mom's right. Plus, I'm used to my house. It'll be easier for you too if anything happens. Two birds with one stone, right? With my mother-in-law present, I couldn't argue with Brian, and it was decided that we'd move into his parents' home. Turns out, Brian is very much a mama's boy. In retrospect, had I been more assertive back then, maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way. Living with my in-laws was incredibly tough for me. Ever since we started living at my husband's parents' house, his mama's boy tendencies accelerated. The first person he'd ask for anything was always Mom. While my mother-in-law took care of most of the cooking and household chores, the rare times I made dinner he would say, "My mom's cooking tastes better." Perhaps my mother-in-law enjoyed being relied on by her son because she did everything for him. My father-in-law would just turn a blind eye to this behavior and not only ignored me but wouldn't even look at me. Sometimes, when I tried talking to him, he'd just brush me off. I constantly questioned my place in the household. The biggest concern for me was my mother-in-law's extravagant spending habits. After moving in, I realized she adored branded clothes and bags. Every time her favorite brands released something new, she'd buy it. Every release, she'd approach me saying, "Karen, I really want this, but I'm a bit short on cash right now. Could you maybe lend me a little?" Even though I thought she shouldn't buy it if she couldn't afford it, since she did all the cooking and cleaning, I couldn't object and just gave her the money as asked. Thanks to this, the savings I had accumulated since my college days were nearly gone. When I tried discussing this with my husband, he just said, "We're living here rent-free, so don't complain. It's not like I chose to live here." Still, the reason I didn't leave was that my husband, for all his faults, genuinely cared for me. Whenever we both had a day off, he'd take me out on dates and he had even planned our honeymoon. Living with the in-laws was tough, but I kept going, holding on to the hope in his kindness. Finally, the day of our honeymoon that my husband planned arrived. Our destination was Italy. It was a dream come true for me as I always wanted to try authentic Italian cuisine. The thought of traveling abroad with the love of my life made me so excited. However, my excitement for the honeymoon turned into a nightmare due to one thing my husband said. It happened late at night. I woke up wanting to go to the bathroom and noticed my husband wasn't next to me. Assuming he was also in the restroom, I approached and heard him speaking on the phone. Who could he be talking to at this hour? Listening closer, I heard some shocking words.
My wife's gonna be gone tomorrow.
What?
Don't worry, Mom. I've got it all planned. I'll get back to you.
It seemed he was talking to my mother-in-law. But what did he mean by gonna be gone? Fearful, I quickly returned to bed and pretended to be asleep. After a while, my husband came back to bed and soon began snoring. Making sure he was asleep, I stealthily took his smartphone and headed to the bathroom. Luckily, he didn't have a password on it. As wrong as it felt, given the circumstances, I had to look. Opening his messages, I found a terrifying plan detailed in the chats with his mother. They were scheming to take my life for the insurance money, which my mother-in-law intended to spend on branded items. The fear was overwhelming. I couldn't believe that my husband, who had always been kind to me, was plotting this with his mother. I took photos of their conversation with my own phone and returned to bed. The rest of the night, I was too frightened to sleep. As dawn broke and transport services started operating, I realized I needed to leave for my safety. Gathering only my belongings, I decided to leave the hotel on my own. Just as I was about to leave, I spotted my husband's passport on the desk. A good idea just hit me. I took my husband Brian's passport and left the room, in an attempt to strand him abroad. I then headed to the airport, boarded the plane, and returned to New York ahead of him. Throughout that time, Brian kept calling me relentlessly, but I ignored all his calls. Once back in New York, I began preparing to take revenge on my husband and his mother. Since I was living with his parents, I couldn't return home. So, I based myself in a relatively cheap hotel in the city, gathering more evidence and contacting lawyers. I also made occasional visits to our house when his parents were out, sneaking out some of my belongings bit by bit. Brian continued to reach out, but I kept ignoring him. A few days of such life passed, and I was at his parents' house fetching my belongings. His mother, Karen, was at her knitting class, and his father was out golfing. I figured they wouldn't be back for at least 2 hours. As I was packing, I suddenly heard, "Huh? Karen?" I turned around to find my father-in-law standing there. This wasn't good. Brian and I were supposed to be on our honeymoon in Italy until today. "What are you doing here? Weren't you two supposed to be on your honeymoon?" What should I do? What excuse could I possibly give? Should I be honest about why I returned to New York alone? But what if my father-in-law was in on whatever scheme Brian was planning? These thoughts raced in my mind. Seeing my confusion, he said, "It might be better to talk over a coffee. How about we go to a nearby diner?" Not wanting to be there when my mother-in-law returns, I agreed to his suggestion. Once we sat at the diner, he quickly asked, "So, why are you here when you should be abroad? What happened to Brian?" I was hesitant to tell the truth. If he was in on the plan with her and Brian, everything I had worked on would be ruined. "Didn't your wife tell you anything?" I asked, trying to gauge his knowledge. Looking puzzled, he responded, "I haven't heard a thing." His reaction suggested that he genuinely didn't know anything. Believing him, I decided to lay out everything to him. "Are you aware of this plan?" I then showed him the printed messages exchanged between Brian and my mother-in-law. His face was one of sheer shock. "No way! I've seen them whispering together a few times, but I never thought they were plotting something like this." It seemed like my father-in-law really didn't know. "Yes, when I was over there, I overheard my husband talking on the phone with his mom, and that's when I found out. I got scared, so I returned to the US on my own earlier." "I'm so sorry. My wife really owes you an apology." "Please don't apologize. You haven't done anything wrong. As for the future, I feel terrible asking this of you, but I'm thinking of divorcing Brian." "That's completely up to you, Karen. I'm truly sorry, especially since this should have been a happy time as newlyweds." He apologized to me many times. I used to think he was avoiding me, maybe even disliked me, but he spoke to me with such kindness and concern. Despite him being such a good man, I can't fathom how his wife and my husband turned out the way they did. While I was thinking about this, he shared a story with me.
Karen, you've been forced to buy branded items for my wife, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I have.
You know, it might have been my fault.
Excuse me?
Well, it was shortly after my wife and I got married. I gifted her a designer handbag for her birthday. After that, she became totally obsessed with designer brands. Even at this age, she keeps wearing those expensive brands. I kinda wish she'd dress more age-appropriately.
I see.
There were times when she'd even go into debt just to buy them. I was pretty mad at her then. I never imagined she'd ask you to buy stuff for her now. I'm really sorry about that.
I had no idea that my mother-in-law's obsession with brands had such a backstory. Still, I couldn't forgive her for what she'd done. It's not your fault. She continued her habits even after you got mad at her. She's the one to blame. Right. By the way, how's Brian doing? He was supposed to be back by now, wasn't he? About that. Oh no. I wondered how he'd react knowing that his son was stuck overseas. But I had come this far, I had to tell him everything. Actually, I took Brian's passport with me when I came back to the States. So, he won't be coming back for a while. What?
I'm sorry. I know it's wrong, but it was the only way to smoothly proceed with the divorce.
I see.
Well, since you live with us, I guess it's understandable. So, that's what was going on.
Did something happen? No, just remembered the day you returned to the US. I overheard Brian talking to my wife on the phone. According to the father-in-law, Brian, for a moment, seemed panicked without me, but he later said that things would work out if I just disappeared. At the time, he had no idea what they were talking about, but now it made sense to him. I understand the situation. If you're okay with it, I'll support you, Karen. Really? Thank you so much. While we were talking, my phone suddenly rang. It was from Brian. Given the time, he probably realized his passport was missing. I finally answered the call. Hello? Oh! Karen! Thank God you answered. Where the heck are you? I've been worried sick. But I'm just glad you're safe. I'm sorry for making you worry. I had an urgent call from my family back home and had to return. Things got so hectic that I couldn't get in touch. I get it. But hey, have you seen my passport? I was gonna return today, but I can't find it. About that, I accidentally took your passport with me when I rushed back. What? So what am I supposed to do? You should be able to get a replacement passport there. It'll probably be faster than me sending it to you. A replacement? What about my job? I can't take any more days off. Don't worry, I'll explain everything to your company. I'll also talk to your parents about it. All right then.
I'm sorry. So, that's what's going on. Please be careful when you come back.
With that, I hung up the phone. Karen, you sure can spin a tall tale, can't ya? I've always been crafty, that's for sure. Thanks to my father-in-law supporting me, I was able to proceed with the divorce preparations more smoothly. And finally, the day arrived. Brian managed to get his passport reissued and returned to the States. His mom went to the airport to pick him up, so the two of them came back home together. We're home. Man, what an ordeal. Indeed. All because of Karen. After hearing from Brian that I'd returned to the States before him, his mother, apparently upset that their plan failed, started making sarcastic comments towards me. I wanted to snap back at her, but I held my tongue. No worries. They're gonna get what's coming to them soon. As soon as Brian and his mother entered the house, my father-in-law, with a stern look, said, "Both of you, come here." He led them to the living room where I was waiting. Sit down. Brian and his mother seemed a bit flustered, but they couldn't defy his imposing demeanor, so they sat down obediently. I apologize for bringing this up as soon as you guys got back, but there's something really important we need to discuss. Important? I'll cut to the chase. Brian, I want a divorce.
Divorce. Hold on, Karen. What's this all about? You trap my son in Italy and then demand a divorce when he comes back? There's a limit to being unreasonable. Unreasonable? Aren't you the unreasonable ones here? What do you mean? Oh, so you're playing dumb now? Can you explain this then?
Saying this, I showed them pictures of the messages exchanged between Brian and his mother.
What's this? These can be easily fabricated these days. This isn't valid proof. You're right. This might be weak as evidence. But what about this?
I then presented a voice recorder. Pressing the play button, the recording of a phone conversation between Brian and his mother played. My father-in-law had recorded it for me. Since his wife is hard of hearing, she always turns the speaker volume to the max during calls, making it audible throughout the house. My father-in-law took the opportunity to record them. The conversation revealed that since I had safely returned to the US, their scheme had failed. It also included the disappointed voice of my mother-in-law and my husband discussing their next move.
You can't deny this now, can you? Wait, Karen. Please reconsider the divorce. I only did what my mom told me to. I never wanted any of this. But she kept saying she needed more money to buy her favorite designer items. I just wanted to see her happy. But now, I see the light. I don't want to divorce you. Let's leave right now and live happily. It's not too late, right?
I was utterly dumbfounded by his words. How on earth could he come up with such a delusional fantasy in his head?
You know, I've always thought this, but you really need to stop with the whole mommy thing. It's super creepy. I get that you want to please her, but trying to get rid of your wife and using the insurance money to buy her fancy stuff? No way I'm staying with someone like that. Just the thought gives me a headache.
Brian looked utterly defeated by my words.
In any case, I will definitely be seeking a divorce. Plus, I will also ask for reimbursement for all the designer items you bought with my money. What? But then I won't be able to buy designer items.
Even after all this, she still seems obsessed with designer brands. I'm truly dumbfounded by this mother and son duo.
Enough is enough.
Suddenly, my father-in-law interjected.
All you care about is yourselves. Do you realize how terrified Karen has been because of your actions? Are designer items really worth it to you, even if it means using someone else's money? Do you realize how much trouble you've caused her?
The two of them were taken aback by his outburst. Thanks to him speaking up for me, I felt a bit relieved. But my revenge wasn't over yet.
Wait a sec. When did you find out about this? On the first night of our honeymoon in Italy. I overheard you talking to your mom in the middle of the night. So, that's why you flew back to New York the next morning. You didn't tell my company about this, did you? You're finally catching on? Well, you'll know the answer to that soon enough.
Just as I said that, Brian's phone started ringing at the perfect timing.
It's from the company. You gotta be kidding me.
Hesitantly, Brian answered.
Hello? What? Fired? No, wait. It's all a misunderstanding.
Before he could explain, the call seemed to have been cut off.
Just so you know, I've already provided evidence of this to your company.
Having lost both his wife and job, Brian seemed drained of energy and slumped to the floor.
So, from now on, let's communicate through my lawyer. And stay out of my life, okay?
And just like that, our newlywed life came to an end. The story didn't stop with the divorce. My lawyer, whom I'd been consulting with, told me that even just plotting to kill someone was a crime, so I reported the matter to the police. While they weren't arrested, both of them had to pay a hefty fine. Thanks to having a criminal record, Brian struggled to find a new job, and Karen became the talk of the town. Moreover, to pay for the damages and alimony, almost all of the designer goods Karen had hoarded were sold off. The only thing left was a purse, a birthday gift from her husband. From now on, the household finances will be managed by her husband, and Karen's pocket money would be reduced. Seems like they got a taste of their own medicine. As for me, I'm living alone in a condo in Manhattan. While I did divorce shortly after getting married, I didn't feel lonely at all. Rather, I felt liberated. If possible, I'd never want to live with someone else again. Sure, living alone has its challenges, but not having to constantly be wary of someone else is more than worth it. And no more dealing with Karen's money grubbing. I've started saving bit by bit, hoping that someday, I'd find happiness with someone else.
It's all your fault for having a wedding with a woman like that when I'm around. I didn't like it, so I just ruined it.
I woke up in the hospital I was taken to, hearing my husband and best friend talking. I remember, in the middle of my long-awaited wedding, everything suddenly went black. As I continued to listen to their conversation, they started discussing something shocking. Sleeping pills. It turned out they were having an affair, and my best friend had added sleeping pills to my meal to sabotage the wedding. Knowing the truth, I decided to take revenge on them in my dazed state. My name is Michelle. I'm a stay-at-home mom living with my husband Tom and our son Michael. I've always had a complex about one thing. That we never had a wedding. 3 years ago, while I was pregnant with our child, Tom, who I was dating at the time, said, "The order is a bit reversed, but..." and proposed to me. I was over the moon about both the pregnancy and the proposal. However, my parents were strongly opposed. Even during the family gatherings, both families maintained their opposition. A shotgun wedding is out of the question. In response to my parents saying that, Tom's parents always seemed apologetic. And they assured me, no matter what decision you make, we'll make sure to take responsibility. Having an abortion wasn't an option for me, so I went against my parents' wishes and married Tom. At that time, we wanted a wedding but decided against it, considering the childbirth expenses. Now, almost 3 years after our son's birth, we still haven't had a wedding. It always bothered me. To someone like me, my husband finally said, "Let's have a wedding on Christmas." The reason being, I was gonna return to work at a hotel next spring, and our son was gonna start attending daycare. Knowing we'd be busier then, my husband felt we should have the wedding before that. Of course, I immediately agreed. I was so happy. Especially since my husband had been going out more often recently for drinks or other events, and I had started wondering, does he find it boring to be with me, or have I gone from being his lover and wife to just a mom? But it seems those worries were unfounded. The complex I had felt for so long vanished, and the recent concerns about Tom also seemed resolved. Looking back, I realize I was on cloud 9. The day after my husband's suggestion, I began planning the guest list. I have 4 close friends. I've been friends with them since high school, and even through college and starting our careers, we've remained tight-knit. Laura is a hardworking lawyer, Nancy is a working mom of 4-year-old twins, Rachel is currently expecting, and Isabel works at the same company as her husband. Though each of us is in a different stage in life, we regularly meet up for meals and trips, always staying in touch. I wanted to hand out wedding invitations to these 4 besties in person, so I decided to organize a lunch gathering. Congrats on the wedding. That sounds weird, right? Happy wedding, Michelle. Thanks for the invite. Rachel, the pregnant one, exclaimed. Thanks. Tom was like, let's have a wedding. I was so happy. But Rachel, make sure you don't overdo it, okay? You gotta take care of yourself. I said, only to be interrupted by Nancy, a mother of 2. No worries. I was working full-time when I was in her shoes. A wedding is a piece of cake. I had a tough time even with just 1 kid. Everyone's different, so really Rachel, don't push yourself. While we were discussing, Laura, the lawyer, playfully pinched my right shoulder. Hey! Don't flaunt your happiness like that. It's hard for Isabel and me to join the conversation. Right, Isabel? Isabel, looking a bit distracted, responded, huh? Oh, yeah. Seriously, don't show off. I observed Isabel and felt something was off. She seemed less lively than usual. Isabel was usually the lively one, often considered the cute youngest of our group of 4. So, her being unusually silent was definitely off. I wondered if the topics we were discussing were unsettling for Isabel, who was still single, or if they were subjects she'd rather we not touch upon. I chose not to delve deeper into it. On the day of my wedding, I was so excited I felt like I could fly. My husband and son were both dressed in matching tuxedos, and I finally got the chapel wedding I'd always dreamed of. My parents, who had initially opposed the marriage, finally seemed to accept and acknowledge us. They were all smiles at us, the newlyweds. I was worried about Rachel, who was pregnant, and Isabel, who seemed a bit down, but I was overjoyed to have all 4 of my dearest friends present with me. It was a truly, truly happy and wonderful wedding. I had planned so many special things for the reception afterwards. I was sure it would be a great time. I had no inkling of anything amiss. For the reception meal, we had prepared a French full course. I'd often heard brides say they were too nervous to eat much at their reception, but having been married for 3 years already, I was calm and collected. While enjoying the delicious French cuisine, I was comforted watching my son, seated between my husband and me, happily munching on his kid's meal. My son had been such a good boy, sitting quietly. We had promised him that if he got fussy, we'd take him to sit with his grandparents. He looked so adorable behaving like that. The reception went on without a hitch. Greetings from my husband's boss and colleagues I had worked closely with. A slideshow our friends had made showcasing our family's memories. There were tears and laughter. It truly was a great time. We went for a wardrobe change. My son had drawn patterns on our pristine white dress and suit with fabric crayons. All 3 of us matched. For the candlelight service and photo session, I had always known I wanted to wear this dress. After the candlelight service, I took photos with family, relatives, and friends. Everyone complimented my dress, which made me so happy. I caught a glimpse of my husband chatting with Isabel. They knew each other, so there was nothing unusual about it. You see, around the time my husband and I got legally married, Isabel was struggling with workplace harassment at her former job. So, she consulted my husband, who worked in HR, and he spoke on her behalf to his company, leading Isabel to transfer there. Since then, it seemed that Isabel often sought job advice from my husband. Considering I worked in a hotel, I figured my husband, being in the same workplace, would be better equipped to counsel her, so I too asked him to look out for Isabel. My husband appeared to be genuinely concerned, regularly assisting her since then. So, even when I saw Isabel laughing and taking pictures with my husband, I didn't think much of it. Things took a turn right before I was about to read a letter of gratitude to my parents. It happened while I was listening to a guest's speech. All of a sudden, my vision blurred, and everything in front of me seemed to shake. Up until that point, I felt perfectly fine, but all at once, my sight got fuzzy, and my thoughts became jumbled. I've gotta hold it together. Even though that's what I thought, maintaining my seated posture became challenging. I'm gonna fall! By the time that thought crossed my mind, I was already on the floor. Michelle! What happened? I could faintly hear the alarmed voices of those around me. Someone shouted, "Call an ambulance," but I wanted to tell them, "No, I'm fine." Yet, I couldn't muster the strength to speak. My husband cradled me, constantly reassuring, "It's okay, it's gonna be all right, Michelle. It's just a sleeping pill, don't you worry. You'll be fine in a jiffy." Sleeping pill? What did he mean by that? I tried to figure it out, but I couldn't, and without understanding what he meant, I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was in a hospital. Beside me, my husband was holding my hand. Once he realized I was awake, he immediately called for the doctor. The doctor's diagnosis? An overdose of sleeping pills. "Do you recall taking anything?" the doctor asked. Of course, I had no such recollection. My husband seemed just as clueless, and we both shook our heads. The police wanted to get involved, considering the possibility of foul play. I told the police I had no memory of the event and had never taken sleeping pills. My husband stated, "We have no clue. Many people were around our food, so it's hard to say who might be suspicious. Heck, it might even be one of the hotel staff for all we know." I remembered my husband telling me, "It's just a sleeping pill, you'll be alright," before I blacked out, which made his statement seem odd to me. In the end, with neither of us having any leads, the culprit remained unidentified. The police said they'd continue their investigation and left. It was decided I should stay in the hospital for a couple of days just to be safe, and our son would be looked after by my parents. Relatives and friends rushed to the hospital for support. Once I was awake, and after the police finished their inquiries, they left. Left alone in the room, I was in a daze for a while. But after some time, feeling thirsty, I decided to drag my stand and head to the hospital shop to grab a drink. Then, in the hallway on the second floor near the store, I spotted my husband and Isabel together. "What's going on?" I thought as I approached. I couldn't believe my ears when I overheard their conversation. "There was no need to go that far. It wasn't a lethal dose, so it's fine. It's your fault for having a wedding with that woman when I'm around. I just ruined it because I didn't like it," Isabel said that, wrapping her arm around my husband. I couldn't process what was happening. What's their relationship? Are they just colleagues? What did she mean by lethal dose? I knew I couldn't get caught listening, so I hid behind a pillar in the hallway to overhear their conversation. My husband caressed Isabel's head, saying, "I'm real sorry. You're the only one that matters to me. I had a feeling Michelle was getting suspicious lately, so I just put on a show with that wedding. I explained it to you, didn't I? I don't want to be taken for a ride with ridiculous child support. It's just till we don't have to spend on Laura anymore. You know?" Isabel, narrowing her eyes at her husband, said in a coquettish voice, "You promised, remember?" Hearing that, even I could tell what kind of relationship my husband and Isabel had. They were having an affair. Deceiving me, keeping our marriage intact, all while continuing their illicit relationship. A marriage of convenience just for the sake of it. Moreover, Isabel, who wasn't satisfied with even that ceremony, drugged it to ruin it. I've been betrayed by my husband and Isabel, the two most important people, all this time. After that, tears wouldn't stop flowing. I couldn't bear to watch my husband and Isabel getting all lovey-dovey anymore. I gave up going to the hospital store, returned to my room, and pulled the sheets over my head. My emotions were all over the place, but oddly enough, my mind was clear. The more I thought about it, the more unforgivable what my husband and Isabel did became. I was filled with regret and sadness. "You should rest up." Even though the doctor told me that, I was wide awake and couldn't sleep. I cried all night, and as the sun rose, I was determined to get my revenge on the two of them. 24 hours ago, the love I thought I had for my husband, whom I believed I loved so much, had vanished. And the friendship I valued so much with Isabel had disappeared without a trace. With that resolve, I was plotting my revenge against the two. Unaware of this, my husband came to visit me first thing in the morning and tried to strike up various conversations. Honestly, it was nothing but stressful. I'm still feeling a bit out of it, so I'm gonna sleep. Saying that, I pulled the covers over and pretended to sleep, all the while lost in thought. I want to take everything away from those two. From my husband, I want to take away our home, his job, and all his money. From Isabel, I want to take away her job, her friends, and my husband. Now, what should I do to achieve that? I couldn't come to a conclusion on my own. However, for now, I needed proof of my husband's and Isabel's affair. I knew that much was necessary. 2 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. Desiring swift revenge on the two of them, the very next day, I headed to a private investigator's office to gather evidence of Tom and Isabel's affair, and to find out whether Isabel had been prescribed sleeping pills. I had 2 requests. After that, I contacted Laura, who's a lawyer. Even though she was surprised when I told her we needed to talk right after my discharge, Laura made time for me. The meeting place? Laura's law office. "Wanna go to a cafe or a restaurant?" I replied to her kind offer. "I'd like to talk somewhere private." So, it was decided to meet at the law firm where Laura worked. In the long run, I had thought of officially hiring her as my attorney, so this might have been for the best. I immediately told Laura everything I had seen that day at the hospital. Laura was visibly shocked, but after some thought, she said, "Come to think of it, Isabel was always praising Tom a lot." Then she added, "If it's true that Isabel had an affair with Tom and she's behind the incident, that's despicable. I'd like to think of Isabel as my close friend too, so I really don't want to believe this. However, I'll help you gather all the evidence thoroughly. If we don't find any, we'll pretend this conversation never happened. But if we do, I'll be fully on your side, Michelle." I could understand Laura's disbelief. I'd probably have a hard time believing it if I were in Laura's shoes too. For a while, under Laura's guidance, I tried to gather evidence without letting husband catch on. However, the results weren't great. His phone was securely locked and he always had it with him. He also seemed cautious, as the number of times he went out drinking had decreased. The private detective I hired had the same results. There were pictures of him and Isabel eating together, traveling in a car, but none of them provided solid evidence of an affair. The only progress was with the sleeping pills. I found out that Isabel, who had been bullied at work 3 years ago, had been prescribed them by a doctor, and I learned the type of drug she'd been given. I didn't know what type of sleeping pill I had been given, so I stored this information as evidence to eventually submit to the police. Then, I told Laura about the only evidence I found, which was the medicine. Laura suggested, "What if Michelle pretends to be away from home? Maybe Tom will let his guard down?" "No way. He'd never do that," I laughed, but Laura was serious. I laughed, but Laura was dead serious. "You know, I've handled quite a few divorce cases, and it's surprisingly common. Spouses doing things at home when the other's away. I think it's worth giving it a shot." So, I decided to give it a try. The timing was mid-February. Right around Valentine's Day. "I want to take our son and visit my parents out in Nebraska before I start working in March," I told him. When I said that, Tom responded, "Sounds great. Go ahead," and he was supportive. I told him I'd be gone for a week, leaving on a Thursday and coming back the following Wednesday. In reality, the plan was to stay in Nebraska for a couple of nights, show Tom pictures and video calls of us there to reassure him, and then see if anything happened over the weekend. It was all Laura's idea. She also suggested setting up hidden cameras at 3 points in the house: the entrance, living room, and bedroom. This was also Laura's idea, and the camera was something she borrowed from an acquaintance of hers. As planned, I sent Tom pictures of my son and me in Nebraska and made video calls to him. He genuinely seemed happy to see us having a good time. Maybe I had misunderstood what happened at the hospital. I couldn't see any signs of abnormal behavior from husband. But the next day shattered that notion. I checked the surveillance cameras I had set up. First thing in the morning, Tom had turned off the pet camera we use for our son or covered it with cloth. My husband was clearly acting strange. And then, at 7 p.m. It wasn't just husband who came home from work. He brought Isabel with him. Today's Friday. It must have been perfect for the two of them, having the next day off. Maybe Isabel will stay over the entire weekend. I quickly contacted Laura. "So, Isabel's the one he's cheating with, huh?" After Laura sounded disappointed, she said, "Come back here tomorrow. We're gonna get revenge on those two." She said that to me. All this time, on the surveillance footage, husband and Isabel were getting all cozy. I stared at the screen, mulling over the revenge plan Laura and I had devised. The next day, I had to go back home after being called into work. I told my parents and had them look after my son. I was hesitant to tell them the truth, but I knew if I did, my dad would say, "Hold on. I'm coming too." I could already picture him causing a scene, so I held back. Returning to New York, I visited Laura's office. Laura greeted me with a worried look.
Michelle, are you okay?
I'm fine. Sure, I was shocked for a moment when I saw it yesterday. But I've no love or affection left. I just want to break things off ASAP. Besides, knowing I'll have evidence makes me kinda excited. When I responded like that, Laura looked somewhat relieved. Then, the two of us reviewed the surveillance footage to finalize our plan. Once we confirmed that my husband and Isabel had left the house, we would break in. We had already secured some space for Laura and me in the bedroom closet, so we'd hide there. We'd monitor the surveillance footage, wait for my husband and Isabel to come home, and make our move when they showed evidence. During that, I would snap photos with my smartphone. Laura would record a video. However, my cautious husband didn't seem to want to leave the house at all. Isabel tried persuading him several times, saying, "Come on, let's go out. Let's have a date." But he declined every time. Watching with impatience, they finally left in the car to get groceries for dinner. As soon as Laura and I confirmed that, we executed our plan. We quickly went back to the house and successfully hid in the closet. After waiting for about an hour, my husband and Isabel returned, holding hands. It seemed like Isabel was gonna cook dinner, wearing an apron, but it was evident she had nothing on underneath. Seeing Isabel like that, my husband, seemingly overwhelmed by passion, pushed her onto the couch and started to make a move. We exchanged glances and nodded, then left the closet and approached the two of them. The first to notice me was my husband, who had been holding Isabel from behind. Our eyes met, and my husband froze for about 5 seconds, then turned pale, and immediately let go of Isabel. "Why'd you stop?" Isabel said in a playful voice, lifting her head, and she froze too. She said to the two of them, "I knew you two were in that kind of relationship." I wanted proof but couldn't get any. That's why I made up the story about going back home. Now I can get a divorce.
When did you find out?
My husband asked, his voice trembling. I overheard you two at the hospital. So, I knew you both drugged me.
Wait a minute, that's not true. I didn't drug her. It was Isabel who did it on her own.
As expected, my husband spilled the beans about the drug. I grinned. Did you get it, Laura? Got it perfectly. With that, Laura entered the living room.
Why the heck is Laura here?
The first to react was Isabel. Michelle hired me. I didn't want to believe that Isabel was cheating and drugging drinks, so I was helping her gather evidence to prove it wrong. But I was shocked to see that it was actually true on the video.
What do you mean by request?
Tom, having met Laura a few times and knowing her profession, asked anxiously. Tom. What you did counts as infidelity. Michelle has the right to divorce you and claim alimony.
Whoa! Hold on. It's not like that. It was just a fling with Isabel. Please don't get the wrong idea.
Laura's words shook him, and the husband quickly denied them.
Wait a minute. A fling? You told me once our kid grows up, you were gonna divorce Michelle, didn't you? Was that a lie?
Of course it was.
Who the hell would choose someone like you over their family?
Isabel was lost for words at husband's harsh statement. Seeing Isabel's reaction, Laura decided to pile on more. I'm sorry to say this when you're upset, Isabel, but we also got testimony that you drugged Michelle's drink.
So what?
You can be charged with crime of injury. The police will be here any minute now.
What?
Laura was speechless. She seemed too shocked to say anything.
Wait. Stop it. It was just a joke, right? Tom, help me out here.
Isabel cried out to my husband for help. Tom ignored Isabel's pleas. Laura said to him, if you knew that Isabel was mixing in sleeping pills, there's a chance you could be considered an accomplice.
Why me? She did that on her own.
Afterwards, when the police arrived and were shown the footage we had taken earlier, both Isabel and husband were taken to the station for questioning. Additionally, when I mentioned the information I'd obtained from a private investigator about her being prescribed sleeping pills, they responded, "We'll thoroughly investigate that matter as well." I was told that. After Tom and Isabel were taken away, I booked a hotel room and toasted with Laura. I didn't want to spend another second in that house. And for the final touch at the hotel, I sent videos of the affair and the testimony about the sleeping pills to the company where Tom and Isabel worked. The effect was immediate. A week later, husband was questioned at the police station. Fortunately, he wasn't charged, but he did lose his job. After the company saw the two videos and confirmed the facts, several testimonies came forward about the two acting suspiciously at work. As a result, my husband was forced into voluntary retirement. Everything went according to mine and Laura's plan. Around that time, I began discussions about divorcing my husband. My husband came alone to Laura's office. "Didn't you hire a lawyer?" He replied, "I asked a friend, but they turned me down because they said the odds were overwhelmingly against me." Then, after taking a deep breath, he began to plead.
"That's not why I came today. I came to ask Michelle for forgiveness. Please. I'll pay alimony or whatever it takes, just don't divorce me."
Saying this, my husband got on his knees and begged. I was unmoved by his pleas. Why would anyone want to get back with a man who cheated and is now unemployed? At least, I don't. Let's get a divorce.
"No. I'll never do it again. Please reconsider. And Tom Jr. needs his father, right?"
I was disgusted that he would bring up our son at this point.
"We don't need a jobless father who's been unfaithful. Even without you, I'm confident I can raise our child without any hardship."
Despite what I said, my husband tried to continue with his excuses and begging. Laura interrupted him. "This isn't going anywhere. Should we bring this to mediation? Tom, you're clearly at a disadvantage. The legal fees will just deplete your savings. For us, as long as we get the divorce, it doesn't matter how. But for you, it'll just be like throwing your money away." Tom held his head in his hands and let out a scream. After pondering for a good 5 minutes, my husband finally said, "Give me some time to think," he said in a strained voice, and then left the office. Seeing his state, Laura and I couldn't contain our laughter and burst out laughing. 2 weeks later, Tom messaged me agreeing to the divorce and we decided to meet again. The location was once again Laura's office. My husband who came looked extremely worn out. It seemed like he had given up this time, as he unemotionally accepted all the terms Laura proposed. In the end, he would pay a compensation of $15,000, monthly child support of $400, and I'd also get half of my husband's severance pay. We settled on the agreement with no division of assets for my husband. However, he seemed unable to find a new job and begged, "Can I make the compensation payments in installments?" Without any division of assets, the only money he had was his severance pay. Being jobless, he probably had no choice but to use that for living expenses. Reluctantly, I agreed to let him pay in installments by increasing the compensation to $16,000 as interest. And so, we got divorced without a hitch. I managed to get the money as planned and rendered my husband jobless. I believe I took everything from my husband, family, job, and money. Next is Isabel. For days after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from Isabel's lawyer, asking to settle the matter of the wedding out of court. Just like always, we decided to discuss it at Laura's office. As soon as Isabel entered the office, she pleaded, kneeling down, "Please forgive me. I'll pay any amount of compensation." Recalling my husband groveling in Laura's office, I had to chuckle, "Not gonna happen." That's what I replied. "Why? Aren't we friends?"
"I'm hurt."
The look on Isabel's face made me angry.
"Who had an affair with a friend's husband and then drugged me? It was you who betrayed me first, wasn't it, Isabel? I don't consider you a friend anymore." "That's harsh. The sleeping pills weren't a big deal, and I broke up with Tom, didn't I?
Isabel shouted back.
So what? I'm still hurt. Besides, if you want Tom, he's all yours.
As I said this, Isabel seemed a bit pleased. But just so you know, he's unemployed. He quit his job after the affair with you got out. Now he's jobless and can't even pay me alimony. If you're okay with such a man, go ahead. I guess you're content with my leftovers, I said with a smug face. Suddenly, Isabel shrieked and lunged at me. Quickly, her lawyer stepped in to intervene. That was attempted injury, right? Laura remarked, causing the lawyer's expression to darken. As for the wedding issue, feel free to sue. But please let this one slide, the lawyer pleaded. Laura asked me, Michelle, are you okay with this? When I nodded in agreement, Laura said, all right, we'll drop the settlement. We'll proceed with suing Isabel.
No way! Laura, that's too harsh. I never did anything to you.
I'm not your friend. Nancy and Rachel, after hearing about this, were disgusted with you. Don't you think you're out of friends? When Laura said this, Isabel began crying hysterically. That's so unfair. What did I even do? Probably fearing another assault, Isabel was practically dragged out of the office by her lawyer. Laura and I burst into laughter. No matter what you did, it wasn't an affair and an injury case.
Well, which one is worse?
But with this, I successfully took away Isabel's job, friends, and husband. I felt very satisfied. It's been 6 months since then. In the end, since we didn't settle out of court, Isabel was arrested for causing injury. Isabel's parents apparently heard about the arrest from Laura and her friends, and they came to apologize with compensation. According to her parents, she won't likely get probation because she's been denying and showing a bad attitude. We've tried talking to her, but she seems to have given up and won't listen. On the other hand, her ex-husband seems to be struggling just to pay the compensation. He apparently hasn't been able to find a full-time job yet and is working a construction-related part-time job during the day. At night, he's juggling a job in the cleaning industry, desperately trying to cover alimony, child support, and his own living expenses. I'd be in a bit of a bind if the money stopped coming in, so I hope he doesn't work himself to the ground. As planned, I returned to the hotel job. I've been leaving my son in daycare, so I feel bad he might be lonely, but I make sure to spend all my off days playing with him. With the money I got from my ex-husband, I can easily make a down payment on a condo, so I'm also house hunting. Once things settle down at the hotel, I'm gonna pay the down payment and buy it. My current life, with work and time with my son, is much more fulfilling and fun than when I was a stay-at-home mom living with my ex. Moving forward, I want to cherish this life and hope to someday meet someone great. From today on, I'll be taking care of this little one. Thanks for everything up until now. My mother-in-law exclaimed this to me with a warm smile on her face. Out of the blue, she came over to our house, grinning as she hugged my daughter, Emily. Emily looked dumbfounded at first, but as she began to comprehend her grandmother's words, she tried to wriggle out of her embrace. After holding Emily tight, my mother-in-law flashed another bright smile and said, "You should just leave now. My name is Susan. I work in an office building in the city. I'm a working mom. The building I work in isn't huge, but it's bustling because it houses more than just our company. I always find myself chatting with women of my age group, so I have many friends in the building. I've been recognized for my work in the accounting department and lead a fulfilling life. When I get home, my husband Paul and our 11-year-old daughter Emily are there. Paul and I manage our busy schedules, sharing household chores and childcare responsibilities. He genuinely cherishes both Emily and me. However, our blissful days started to change little by little. Paul tends to impose his own likes and interests on Emily. At first, it was soccer. It's one thing if Emily wants to play, but it felt forceful when he'd only let her play soccer even though she'd rather play in the sandbox. Yet, as she grew older, Emily became a soccer-loving girl who could stand toe-to-toe with her male classmates. Of course, she dreams of making her mark as a female soccer player in the future. I've become one of her biggest fans. But Paul's enthusiasm seemed to last only in the early days. Lately, he's all about swimming. Girls should definitely try swimming. Maybe synchronized swimming could be good? When Paul brought it up during dinner, Emily made a face, clearly perplexed.
But Dad, I love soccer. I find it more fun than swimming and I want to do it even more.
Soccer is cool, sure, but why would you, a girl, want to play a sport typically considered for boys? A palpable tension runs between the two of them. At times like these, I always struggle with when I should intervene. Emily has her own thoughts, so I'm torn whether it's right to interrupt and end the conversation. Emily talks back to her father.
Gender doesn't matter. Right now, soccer is fun and pursuing it is my dream.
You've been playing soccer so much, you've gotten quite toned. You're tanned and look like a boy. Don't women need to be slim to be attractive? If you were swimming, you wouldn't have to worry about tanning. Emily is taken aback by his condescending remarks. I immediately scold my husband.
How could you say that to our daughter? Her physique is proof of the hard training she's been doing.
Just because she's our only daughter. Even though she's training so hard, she's still a girl. What's gonna happen if she ends up being a muscular woman with a small chest? Isn't that sad?
Why can you say such horrible things?
Shocked, Emily falls silent. I yelled at my husband even louder than before, but he doesn't seem to realize he's being insensitive about female soccer players. Sure, the teams are co-ed now, but her competition is mostly men. Emily has her limits being a girl. There aren't any female-only soccer teams around here, so maybe it's time to consider something else. I'm not saying she should go pro in swimming. Isn't it normal for girls to have swimming lessons?
Enough!
Emily storms out, knocking her chair back and running to her room. In disbelief, I turn to my husband who angrily says,
We were in the middle of a conversation.
That wasn't a discussion. It was just him imposing his views, completely disregarding Emily's dignity and dreams. Later, when he wasn't around, I checked on her and as expected, she told me with tearful eyes that she didn't want to talk to her father. The next morning, I suggested she either leave for school at a different time to avoid Paul or if it's too tough, she can take the day off. I did my best to console her. From then on, every time Paul brought up swimming, Emily ignored him.
She thinks she's so special, ignoring me just because she's a girl. Even if she's going through her teenage years, it's a bit much.
My daughter just keeps shutting herself off from her father who won't listen to her words. I strongly felt that we had to change this situation, so I told my husband multiple times.
The one who's going overboard is you. Why do you only push your own interests onto our daughter? Why do you need to badmouth soccer when you talk about the greatness of swimming? You're the one trying to rain on something she's passionate about. Please, just respect her feelings and thoughts.
But it seems like nothing's getting through to him. Instead, he snaps at me.
Now you're gonna tell me what to do? Who do you think is taking care of our daughter? Just because you're my wife doesn't mean you can boss me around. Tell her clearly to quit soccer.
My husband's habit of ordering me and our daughter around and saying things like just because you're a woman or just because you're my wife as if our gender gives him the right, stems from a specific reason. It's a boss of his. We also know him privately, and he's a very close friend. He has been to our house and, apparently, he had a lot to say behind our backs when he found out we both work. This boss seems friendly and easygoing on the surface, and my husband enjoyed his company because of his personality. However, as time went on, the boss's distorted views towards women became more apparent. He started to emphasize the differences between men and women, making more remarks that belittle women's capabilities. At first, my husband would just laugh it off, but gradually those words started to stick. The boss's belief that women have a domestic role, and it's greedy for them to work, started casting a shadow on my husband's heart. This shift in my husband's attitude created a huge rift in our relationship. Initially, he was pressuring me, who works outside the home, to quit my job and stay home. But he realized that with his income alone, it would be hard to maintain our current lifestyle. So, he stopped pushing me outright to quit, but he keeps on preaching about the greatness of being a stay-at-home mom. Yet, that wasn't enough. And eventually, his frustration turned towards our daughter. He probably sympathizes with his boss because he imposes his own tastes and beliefs. He doesn't think about Emily's opinions or her future at all. He just thinks that since Emily is a woman, it's natural for her to obey his commands. The only way to mend this strained relationship is to change him. But no matter what we say or how, nothing seems to get through to him. On top of that, all we get is an outdated response. Who does she think she is, a woman, challenging me? I was distressed, but I couldn't let Emily suffer any longer. I finally brought up the idea of divorce to Paul. I want to distance myself from you, for Emily's future, I said. But he was vehemently against it. This is why women are so foolish. If you really had Emily's future in mind, you'd know it's a bad idea to divorce a breadwinner like me. With rising college expenses, do you really think you can support her all by yourself? You're just too dumb. I'll guide you properly, so just shut up and follow. He said this with an angry expression. His words were filled with confidence, as if he believed he was completely in the right. I've reached my limit. Taking a deep breath, I faced him. Yes, our income will decrease and preparing for college will be hard. But above all, I can't leave Emily by your side any longer. You don't think about her future at all. You just want to control her, don't you? This is the prime time of her life, and it's unfair for her to be dominated by her father. That's why I think we should part ways. I don't expect Emily to become a professional athlete, nor do I think she absolutely can't make it. I just want to support my daughter in pursuing what she loves. And you, who disrespect our daughter's dignity, are nothing but harmful. I believe it's my duty to provide an environment where Emily can safely explore her potential. Don't just casually bring up divorce. If you want to leave, then just go on your own. You're telling me to leave? When did I say that? And how do you plan to live with Emily if I do? Gonna call your mom? Paul crossed his arms, remaining stubborn. But when I stood my ground, his expression quickly turned smug. It's your fault for mentioning divorce. I should just call my mom now and let her discipline you. Paul acted immediately. He called his mother, who lives nearby. Hello, Mom? Look, I'm in a bit of a bind. Susan suddenly mentioned getting a divorce. I'm just as shocked. I hate to ask, but can you come over and set her straight? You're a woman, too. Dad must have set you straight before, right? So, you can do the same for Susan? He said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Most of what he said was blaming me for being selfish. It's quite sickening to hear him talk to his mother in that way. Regardless, my mother-in-law replied, I'm on my way. And it turned out we'd be discussing the divorce. Is Grandma coming? However, since we were discussing this in the living room, Emily came out of her room. We didn't want her to hear us talk about the divorce, so we had told her to stay in her room. She must have sensed something was amiss. Soon, my mother-in-law arrived, and as she caught sight of Emily, she rushed over, pushing past us to hug the little girl tightly. Then she turned to Paul and me with an angry look. I've heard everything, Emily, you've been through a lot. Paul smirked, thinking he had the upper hand, and glanced at me smugly. From now on, I'll take care of Emily. Susan, you can't take it anymore, can you? Just pack up your things and be out by tonight. Upon hearing this, Paul burst out laughing. Pointing at me, he said, See, even Mom agrees. If you apologize now, I might forgive you. How dare you, a wife, defy your husband like that? Say you're sorry. At this, Emily jumped out of her grandmother's embrace. She ran past the adults and into her room. My mother-in-law tried to follow, but the door opened immediately. There stood Emily, with a backpack on, a glossy sports bag slung over her shoulder, and even a cute little green carry-on suitcase in tow. She approached me with a smile.
I'm ready to go. Grandma can take care of the rest. I don't want a creepy dad like him.
She then took my hand. Her sunburned skin made her seem more robust, just like Paul had mentioned. Yet, feeling the warmth of her still tender hand, I nearly shed a tear.
Let's get going, Mom.
The one who was shocked was Paul. I had mentioned leaving, but he probably hadn't anticipated Emily wanting to come with me. Moreover, he was surprised at the bags packed to the brim and how well prepared everything seemed.
What are you talking about?
Emily, you can stay in this house. What we don't need is a nagging mother, right? I'm gonna kick out her and Grandma will come in your place.
I'm gonna take you to swimming lessons next time, so calm down, alright?
The husband, even at this point, kept making selfish remarks. However, it seemed the daughter had decided to ignore Paul, turning her back on him completely. Suddenly, the mother-in-law interjected with a puzzled look. Swimming lessons? Not soccer? Before I could say anything, the daughter spoke up. Dad doesn't like seeing my training and getting a muscular body. He thinks I should get a nice figure, wear cute swimsuits, and have lots of pictures taken. He says girls feel happier when they're popular with boys. Creepy, right? Hearing this from the daughter, both the mother-in-law and I were in shock. The mother-in-law raised her voice.
Paul! What on earth are you telling our daughter? You're not looking at her in that way, are you?
Paul flinched and looked around nervously. It was clear that, even in situations like this, Paul was always on thin ice with his mother.
It's a misunderstanding. But come on, no one wants a girl who looks like a man, right? It's definitely better if she focuses on her looks, dresses to impress guys, and uses makeup. In the end, she's gonna support her husband at home, right?
Paul tried to defend himself. My mother-in-law sighed. What would your late father say if he heard this? Thinking my mother-in-law was on his side, Paul looked even more flustered. But it wasn't surprising. Almost all of Paul's derogatory comments about women, and the way he treated me and Emily, had been reported to his mother. But I had hesitated to tell her about his criticisms of Emily's physique. It would have been too painful for any mother to hear. Paul had long since lost his filter. He always spoke disrespectfully about women, even to his mother, and no amount of scolding had any effect. My mother-in-law, unlike Paul, was a strong, dependable person. Eventually, after several consultations, we divorced, and a plan was set for my mother-in-law to re-educate Paul.
I'm sorry, Emily, Susan. I'll take responsibility for raising this boy,
the mother-in-law said, clearly referring to her son, Paul. Thus, in a role reversal, Emily and I temporarily moved into his mother's house. True to her word, she moved into our home and began Paul's re-education. The divorce was finalized, and we were supposed to go back to our normal lives. Finding a new place and dividing assets might take time, but living as a married couple was out of the question. As soon as Emily put down her backpack at her grandmother's house, she burst into tears. I hugged her, feeling more than ever that I never wanted to see Paul again. Just a week later, while I was at work, I had an unexpected visitor. The visitor's name was Mr. Smith, a name that sounded familiar to me. When I confirmed his full name, it was unmistakably that of my husband's boss. The very man who had influenced Paul so much. I was shocked and wondered why such a person would come to my workplace, yet I headed to the lounge booth within the office building. We have limited space for guests at our company, and it was currently being used for meetings with other clients. When we run out, we often borrow common areas within the building. For major negotiations, we might rent out a separate meeting room. Most of our walk-in visitors are salespeople, so I asked him to wait in the lounge. But it wasn't just Mr. Smith there. Paul was there too. Apparently, they had both taken a detour from their field sales to visit me. We can't talk properly at home with my mother around. Figured you'd take us seriously at work, Paul said. It seemed my husband, knowing I had his mother on my side, brought his idolized boss. What he wanted to say was the same old line. "You need to settle down and listen to me. Heads of households should have the final say, you know. Women are just an accessory to men. Dressing up nicely is a given. Thinking they can compete with men in sports or anything is presumptuous. Man, I'm far from perfect. Can't discipline my unruly wife or daughter. Mr. Smith, I really need your help." Looking at my husband laughing and acting smug, I was getting a headache. To make matters worse, he said he would never approve of Emily's soccer and assumed I might as well quit my not-so-important job. The issue was Mr. Smith, sitting next to him, grinning at my discomfort, backing up every word Paul said. There wasn't Paul's mother here to take my side. I was being interrupted at work and, grappling with how to handle them, their harsh words paralyzed me. I was holding back from snapping at them, fearing things might escalate to violence. I could feel my eyes burning with tears. I was just grateful Emily wasn't here to see this. I wouldn't want her to see her father with such a scornful expression. I was contemplating leaving without a word, when someone spoke to us. "Isn't that Mr. Smith from AB Company's sales department? What are you guys up to?" Both men turned around and, in unison, quickly stood up. An older gentleman was standing there. He was well-dressed and clearly held a position of authority. Beside him was a woman, perhaps his aide or secretary. From the disdainful look she gave Paul and Mr. Smith, it was clear she had heard their conversation. "Mr. Miller, what brings you here?" "My office is on the 3rd floor. You guys usually visit the branch office's conference room for sales. I guess you might not be interested in knowing this, but it might be useful for you to remember whether you're visiting the branch or the headquarters." At the sound and content of the man's chilling voice, Paul and Mr. Smith were left speechless, their faces pale as ghosts. The man was a business owner on the 3rd floor of the office building. If he didn't have meetings or appointments, he'd be over here, and I've seen him a few times before. The CEO remembered me and had been secretly listening to the intense conversation between us in the lounge. It wasn't until his secretary mentioned it that he realized Mr. Smith was a sales rep from one of their partners. "Heard she's your wife, huh? To act that way towards a woman and kids. Was that young sales guy with you, Mr. Smith? Hand over your business card now." The CEO then collected business cards from both of them, casting a disdainful look at the trembling pair. After all, they had been working in a conference room so grand one could mistake it for the CEO's office of a headquarters. I found out later that Paul's company had stirred up a massive commotion, like poking a hornet's nest. "We'll have to reconsider our partnership with you. Please, I beg of you. I was just disciplining my not-so-competent wife. We won't cause any trouble for your company. Forgot that most of our consumers are homemakers raising kids? Even if it's someone outside the company, being associated with someone of such beliefs would hurt our image. Just get out of here." Paying no attention to me, my ex-husband and his boss kept apologizing. But even their desperate pleas reeked of misogyny, and the CEO remained stern. I wasn't in a position to defend them, so I just watched. Perhaps due to the commotion, various office workers were giving the two cold stares. Eventually, the two were chased out of the building like flies. Later on, the CEO did reduce and eventually cut off all business dealings with my ex-husband's company. Rumors also spread about their behavior, causing many clients to back out, and the company removed the two from their sales positions. They lost trust from clients and within their company, ending up in positions where they were given no significant tasks. As for me, since that incident, the CEO has personally introduced me to some top-notch divorce attorneys, and we've kept in touch. I was advancing with custody investigations with his support. Juggling work, matters concerning Emily, and the all procedures were tough, but with legal support, I was able to handle things more calmly. However, one day, my ex-husband and Mr. Smith showed up at my workplace again. "Please get Mr. Miller for me, help me out," they pleaded loudly. I didn't feel as intimidated by them as I used to. It wasn't that they had changed, but rather that I had grown capable of taking their words calmly. Whispers and murmurs of surprise emanated from my colleagues towards the two who waited outside. This is gonna cause problems for other companies too. Eventually, I had no choice but to call the police. When they arrived, my ex-husband, Paul, got aggressive and was taken away. Thankfully, no one got hurt, and while he wasn't arrested, the ostracization within the company intensified. Paul, once seen as a potential star in sales alongside Mr. Smith, couldn't bear the shame and chose to resign early. As for Smith, his attitude didn't change. In fact, his behavior worsened due to his dissatisfaction with how he was treated. He brazenly started to slack off at work, arguing it was the company's fault for not giving him work. Furthermore, his aggressive behavior and misogynistic comments increased, and it seems he eventually faced a lawsuit from female colleagues. Later on, through the grapevine, I heard Mr. Smith sought legal help. However, when a female attorney listened to his story, he spewed outrageous comments like, "Get me a male attorney," or, "How can a woman be an attorney? How much did you pay? Maybe you're paying with your body?" leading him to be banned from that law firm. I was transferred to a new branch of my company. Given that my ex-husband knew my whereabouts and being a single mother had its challenges, I was moved to a department that prioritized a more child-friendly work environment. I couldn't move too far because of Emily's school and soccer team. I didn't want to change her environment entirely. Fortunately, the new location was just a few subway stops away, so as long as I was careful, I wouldn't run into Paul. Working in this new environment was quite stimulating for me. I could ensure time at home to chat with Emily, feeling fulfilled in both my work and personal life. Emily still passionately played soccer every day. I'm so happy to fully support her dreams. I decided to occasionally meet with Paul's mother. We'd make a bit of a trip to enjoy a cup of coffee at a fancy cafe and chat. Emily seems to be back in good spirits, doesn't she?
Yes, she really is. She adapted to the new environment quickly. Leaving home seems to have been good for her. I should have made that decision sooner.
When I smiled and nodded, my mother-in-law took a moment and then talked to me about my ex-husband Paul's behavior. Paul had quit his job and apparently stayed home for a while, deeply depressed. During that time, Mr. Smith faced lawsuits from female colleagues at the company, and naturally they lost touch. He probably had other things on his mind. It seems that since putting some physical distance from Mr. Smith, Paul's perspective has been gradually changing. I was told that he's breaking away from the influence of Mr. Smith and slowly going back to how he used to be. I quietly breathed a sigh of relief. While it seems we still need my mother-in-law to keep an eye on him for a bit, I do prefer the kinder Paul I once knew. It's uncertain when he might relapse, so I haven't let him see our daughter, Emily. Any exchanges are done through lawyers or Paul's mother, avoiding direct contact.
I won't ever say you should remarry him. If he's truly remorseful, he'd feel too guilty to even ask for it. You've got Emily to consider too, you both should prioritize your own happiness.
Paul's mother concluded with that. I had always known she was dependable, but with this matter, I realized how invaluable she really is. Regardless of my history with Paul, I want to have a good relationship with her as an individual. When I expressed this, she got teary-eyed but agreed shyly. We're planning to watch a soccer game together. Emily has been selected as a regular player among the seniors, so we're gonna cheer her on with all we've got.
Don't you dare sit before me, being just a wife.
Mike's roar filled the room, and at that moment, a dull pain shot through my belly, now at 6 months pregnant.
Ouch!
An unfamiliar pain coursed through my stomach, and I crumpled to the floor.
Madison, are you okay? Hey, what do you think you're doing?
While my mother-in-law and father-in-law quickly came to my aid, Mike, used to defying his parents, didn't seem fazed at all.
In this house, I'm the boss. I'm the smartest and most elite, that's why.
His tone, dripping with scorn as if laughing at everyone present, made me angry, but I was too afraid of being hit again to talk back. Just then, someone said excuse me and sat down next to Mike. I watched intently as the person pulled a business card from their pocket and handed it to Mike. My name is Madison. I'm turning 29 this year. I used to work for a telecommunications company after graduating from college, but I quit this summer. I wanted to stay at the company a bit longer, but Mike had asked me to quit because he said, "I'll take care of you." The truth is, there was another reason why I quit my job. I was pregnant with Mike's child. Mike and I ended up in what you might call a shotgun wedding. Currently 5 months pregnant, I had to tell my colleagues it was because of the pregnancy and marriage. They were sad to see me go, but congratulated me on the marriage and pregnancy. I still feel blessed for having such wonderful colleagues. So, I do have some regrets about quitting my job at Mike's request. Mike's words always carried an absolute power. If you want to put it nicely, you could say he's full of confidence. If not, well, he's kind of pushy. Mike graduated from a very prestigious private university and went on to work at the mega bank Bank of America, following an elite path. He was assigned to the sales department, where his gift of gab helped him quickly climb the ranks, and right around when we were getting married, he was promoted to head of the sales department. Lucky for us, I'm excellent. Now the family's secure, he said, as if his promotion was the most natural thing in the world. Mike must have been pleased his efforts were being recognized, and at that time, I didn't give it much thought. After all, I had no inkling to doubt the man I was about to marry. But at that moment, I was still unaware. Unaware of the kind of person Mike really was. I met Mike 2 years ago at a mixer that a friend had arranged. I was 27 then. As my friends were getting married one after another, I felt a sense of urgency without having a partner. Because of my personality, I couldn't take the initiative to talk to men, and I was always shy about love. So when a college friend I hadn't heard from in a long time contacted me, I jumped at the chance. The mixer was with 3 men and 3 women, and Mike was the oldest of the male group. They all worked at Bank of America, where my friend's childhood friend was employed. When I first heard that all the men were employees at a well-known bank, I was surprised. My 2 friends, who were more interested in money than I was, eagerly questioned the men and squealed with excitement. I felt somewhat out of place and was about to give up, thinking this might be another dead end. But, as luck would have it, Mike seemed to take a liking to me, hanging back while my 2 friends were in the spotlight. I was surprised when he asked, "Would you like to grab a drink after this?" Since Mike was also my type, I happily agreed with an enthusiastic yes. So, after the group date, we went out a few times, and after a confession from Mike, we started seeing each other. When I asked Mike why he hadn't gotten married yet, he'd always say, "Oh, you know, I've been busy with work." He must really love his job. Since I admire men who are dedicated to their work, I didn't mind it at all. While we were dating, Mike was always considerate, practicing chivalry and always putting me first.
Are you okay? Not tired from walking? Forgot your handkerchief? I have one, use mine. Look, your shoe's rubbing. Let me put a band-aid on for you. His perfect gentlemanly behavior had really impressed me. I thought maybe I could spend my life with this man. Even though our relationship had just begun, I was already dreaming about a future with Mike. Our relationship took a significant step forward about 2 months ago, a year and a half after we started dating. I had been experiencing some unexplained health issues for a while. I had headaches and nausea, and when I went to the doctor, they just said it was probably a cold, and I couldn't even work properly. Seeing my condition, Mike, who I was living with, said, "Madison, could you be pregnant?" Huh? His unexpected words threw me for a loop. But indeed, there were signs. I rushed to the pharmacy to buy a pregnancy test, tried it at home, and lo and behold, it indicated that I was indeed pregnant. I can't believe it. It looks like I'm really pregnant. See, I told you. You should go to the doctor. Yeah. Mike was trying to keep his cool, but his voice was louder than usual. I could tell he was excited. There was a baby inside me, our baby.
I thought about it as I rubbed my belly. It made me feel an indescribable sense of affection. The next day, I went straight to the OB/GYN. The test confirmed that there was indeed a baby, and I was told I was 3 months pregnant. The doctor said, "It's surprising you didn't notice until now, but since Mike and I weren't married yet, pregnancy had been the furthest thing from my mind." But now, looking back, I realized that the strange malaise was morning sickness. After leaving the clinic, I told Mike that the pregnancy was going well.
That so?
His reaction wasn't what I expected. I thought he would be happier, but his response was surprisingly nonchalant, which caught me off guard.
Mike, does this mean? Yeah, let's get married.
He said it so casually that it was nothing like the proposal I had imagined. But I was thrilled that he suggested we get married, so I was too excited to fall asleep that night. But even then, the change in Mike had already begun. It was my fault I didn't notice. The next day, before going to work, Mike said to me,
"I want you to quit your job before we get married." What?
Quitting my job hadn't crossed my mind. The telecommunications company I worked for was supportive of women taking maternity leave, and everyone came back after their leave. Sure, some people quit when they get married because they're in a long-distance relationship and have to move away to be with their husband. But few people resign just because they're getting married or pregnant.
But I want to keep working. It's fine. I'll provide for us. But still.
When I hesitated, Mike let out an exasperated sigh and added,
"I'm going to be promoted to sales manager next month. So my salary's gonna be way better. Lucky you, I'm so capable. Now our family will be set."
That's great. What could I say to that? It's true Mike is capable, and his promotion must be a recognition of his efforts. Compared to Mike's salary, mine is indeed just small change. Even if I quit, the 3 of us could live comfortably. I convinced myself of that. In the end, I submitted my resignation at work, and a month later, I left the company. My colleagues were all sad to see me go, but when I explained the situation, they said, "Can't be helped. You can't go against the man you're going to marry." That's probably what they meant. I thought that from then on, Mike and I would start our happy days together, thinking about our coming child, but I was naive. It was around this time that I started to notice the changes in Mike.
"Hey Madison, where's my dress shirt?" "If it's about the shirt, I'm planning to wash it today." "What? You haven't washed it yet? For a stay-at-home wife, you sure work slow."
"I was feeling unwell yesterday. I'm sorry." Once I quit my job, Mike started to say things like, "For a stay-at-home wife, you're pretty slow with the chores." I really want to finish my tasks swiftly, but with the early stages of pregnancy, I've been feeling unwell and can barely take care of myself. He also said things like, "You're so useless, that's why you could quit your job so easily." If it were me, they'd have begged me to stay, belittling my capabilities. Even though it was Mike who wanted me to quit, I'm infuriated by the way he speaks to me. But due to my continued ill health and lack of energy to stand up to Mike, all I could do was hang my head in those moments. Seeing that I didn't fight back, Mike seemed to think he could treat me like a punching bag, venting his work frustrations on me.
"That guy is totally useless. Just a newbie and already leaving on time. There are too many incompetents in the world. Even the bosses are just old and can't do their jobs."
I found all his comments unbearable because they were so disdainful. But now, having quit my job, I had to endure it because he was the only one supporting me and the child. Months passed like this, with me feeling restricted, until I overcame the long period of morning sickness and entered the stable period of my 6th month of pregnancy.
"I'd like to arrange a meeting to introduce our families for the wedding. Can you check with your parents for their availability?"
We hadn't yet greeted each other's parents formally, nor had we had a family meet and greet due to my pregnancy, as gathering multiple times would be difficult. So we thought, why not gather both families together all at once?
"All right."
Mike agreed surprisingly readily and immediately contacted his family. I reached out to mine as well, and we found a date that worked for everyone. Eventually, the wedding introduction and family meet and greet were set for 2 weeks later on Sunday. I was preparing myself mentally and physically for the day, but Mike kept ordering me around as if I was using pregnancy as an excuse to slack off on housework. I was never slacking, I was just taking breaks now and then. Why must I be spoken to this way, I wondered, as my frustration built up. Then came the Sunday 2 weeks later. We headed to the event, which would take place at Mike's parents' home due to the large number of attendees.
Welcome, Madison. We've been looking forward to meeting you. It's nice to meet you. My name is Madison. I hope to get along well with everyone.
His parents seemed kind and classy, which put me at ease. They were very happy when I handed them the flowers I brought as a gift. In addition to Mike's parents, there were cousins, uncles, and aunts. My family was also there, sitting politely in the living room. I stood in the kitchen with my mother-in-law, helping to prepare the meal, and she was constantly concerned about my being pregnant.
Are you okay, Madison? If you're not feeling well, you can sit and wait. Thank you. I'm fine for now. I'll take a break if I get tired.
Grateful for her concern, I continued to chop and cook. But as she said, after about 30 minutes, my back started to hurt from the weight of my belly.
I'm sorry, I need to rest for a bit. Of course. There are cushions over there, please have a seat. Thank you.
I sat down on a cushion in the living room, as indicated by my mother-in-law. At first, I had a pleasant chat with Mike's relatives, but then Mike, who had been drinking, came over to where I was sitting.
You shouldn't be sitting down before me, being just a wife.
As Mike shouted, a dull pain shot through my 6-month pregnant belly.
Ow!
I crumpled to the floor in a pain I had never felt before.
Madison, are you all right? Hey, what are you doing?
My mother-in-law and father-in-law quickly came to my aid, but Mike, used to defying his parents, seemed unfazed.
In this house, I'm the top dog, you know? I'm the smartest and the elite here.
His words were a sneer at everyone present, and though I was filled with anger, I was too afraid of another violent outburst to speak up. At that moment, someone said "Excuse me" and sat down next to Mike. I watched intently as he pulled a business card from his breast pocket and handed it to Mike.
Huh? What's that, eh?
Mike's eyes widened in astonishment as he looked at the business card passed to him from the man. The relatives were all like, "What's going on?" focusing their attention on Mike and the others.
Smith General Trading Company. You're familiar with our company, right? I mean, familiar is an understatement. Smith Corp is one of the major clients at our USMK Bank. Good to know. It's an honor. I am Madison's younger brother, a graduate of T University, and currently the president of Smith Corporation.
The man was my brother, Kenneth Smith. Smith was my maiden name. I glanced briefly at my brother and parents' faces. My brother was looking straight into Mike's eyes, but I could see the flames of anger burning in his eyes. My parents looked at me and nodded. "It's okay."
T University. President of Smith General Trading. You're Madison's brother?
Yes. You weren't aware of that, I see.
I didn't hear about it.
This time, Mike glared at me. I instinctively looked away. The reason I hadn't told Mike about Smith General Trading was that I feared his high pride would make him unreasonably jealous. Smith General Trading is a major corporation known to everyone in the States, with annual sales reaching $100 billion. If you get a job there straight out of college, you're considered very capable, and I hear it's even harder to get in as a mid-career hire. Kenneth was the president of such Smith General Trading. He is still young at 27, but since he was a child, our father had drilled into him how to manage a business, and after graduating from college and joining Smith Corp, Kenneth quickly started to excel. Just as my father began to follow more often and started taking more time off work, a meeting was called to discuss whether it might be best to just go ahead and hand over the reins of the company to Kenneth early. Come this April, Kenneth finally became the president.
Well, I didn't need to hear it, but there's something I have to tell you. What is it?
Kenneth spoke in a businesslike and polite tone, but Mike continued to act defiantly.
In fact, there's been an issue with some fraudulent activities in the transactions between our two companies.
Fraud? Mike's voice quivered. Perhaps it struck a chord.
Yes. Apparently, our sales manager had given some under-the-table money to your sales rep, encouraging them to fudge the numbers on the invoices. And that sales rep was you.
What? Mike visibly panicked. What does this mean? The rest of us, including relatives, waited for the story to continue.
You were recently promoted to sales manager, I hear. It was in recognition of your hard work, no doubt. But it's not hard to imagine that this position was attained through rampant dishonesty. Of course, I fired our idiot sales manager immediately, but if I report this to your company, you're not going to get off scot-free.
I see. That's what it was. Mike had been accepting bribes from the Smith Company's sales manager by sending falsified invoices. He had increased his sales figures by engaging in similar fraudulent activities with other companies, which led to his promotion to sales manager. While Kenneth's guess was included, the fact that Mike didn't deny it suggested that it was true. Mike trembled on the spot, glaring at Kenneth with eyes like he was looking at an enemy. We couldn't say anything and watched the confrontation with bated breath.
Now, you've climbed the ranks through dishonesty, but just from seeing your behavior today, it's clear. You're not cut out to be in a position of leadership. Punching your pregnant wife's belly? Thinking you're the most important person in this house? Don't joke with me. You always ordering my sister around, thinking you're some kind of elite because you cheated your way up?
Kenneth's polite tone suddenly turned harsh as he scolded Mike. In his eyes, there was a determination to defeat his sworn enemy.
What the hell are you on about? Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong.
Mike snapped back. I clearly saw Kenneth smirk at that response.
You just said what the hell, didn't you? Yeah, I did. So what? I don't want to do business with someone who talks that way to a partner. I thought your company would be a good business partner for us, but I was mistaken. Please ensure your company knows that we will no longer be dealing with you in any capacity. What?
Mike had not expected to be hit with a sanction as serious as ending transactions between the Smith Company and MK Bank of America.
Please, not that. Anything but that.
Mike begged desperately, but Kenneth, perhaps at his wit's end with anger, glared and said sharply,
Aren't you apologizing to the wrong person? I have no use for someone who can't even understand that.
Mike let out a pathetic yelp at Kenneth's shout. I was utterly shocked to see Mike like this. I had never seen him so shaken before.
He tentatively looked my way, then said, I'm really sorry. And to the baby, I'm sorry, it must have hurt.
But the words Mike had said to me in the past flashed through my mind, and I could not forgive him just because he was apologizing now.
I'm sorry, but I need some time to think about this marriage, I refused him.
Mike stood up, dazed, and walked out of the room. Silence followed among us, but when Kenneth humbly apologized for the fuss at such a gathering, one of the relatives said, Let's just toast for today, and the atmosphere brightened up. For a while, we all forgot about Mike's troubles and had a good time.
Madison, I'm really sorry for what Mike has done. There's no rush on the marriage decision, you can take your time. Madison, to your whole family, I'm truly sorry.
Mike's parents said, tears brimming in their eye. Despite having such wonderful parents, I couldn't help but feel sad wondering how Mike ended up the way he did.
No, we're the ones who should apologize for causing such a commotion. Everyone, I'm sorry. Just give me a little more time to think, I said.
No one in my family blamed me for my decision. My parents' eyes conveyed a message, you need to think this through. As I rubbed my belly, I thought about what comes next. Currently, the idea of marrying Mike doesn't sit well with me. But for the sake of this child. Still, no clear answer came to me. I decided to take my time with the decision. A month has passed since then, and I've decided to stay with my parents until the baby is born. As expected, Mike's misconduct at work came to light, and he was fired. Smith General Commerce, a major client, apparently stopped doing business with Bank of America MK as Kenneth had declared. Mike ended up imposing a great loss on his company and losing his job. But he kept coming to my parents' house every day, begging for forgiveness and saying he'd do anything.
You say you'll do anything. But you don't even have a job, do you? Yeah, but I'll find something else, I'll make it work. Please, reconsider, Mike pleaded.
Mike suddenly started talking sense, but it's easy to say anything if it's just talk. However, I've heard from Kenneth that Mike's misdeeds have become well known in the area, and companies are tightening their hiring standards to avoid employing someone like him. If I were in charge of hiring, I couldn't imagine hiring someone who had committed fraud at their previous job. It's clear to see that getting rehired isn't as simple as Mike suggests. At best, he might be able to get a part-time job, but I couldn't see how a part-time job could support me, the baby, and him. Not long ago, I was struggling with the decision to marry him, but hearing Mike's flippant ideas, I finally made up my mind. What Mike did is unforgivable. Not only did he harass me, but he also caused trouble for the company that had been paying him a generous salary. He has a significant debt to pay. With a sigh, I spoke up.
Look, you think you can just find a job and everything will be okay? Who's going to hire someone like you? I certainly wouldn't. You can't live with us. Don't ever show your face to me again.
As I spoke, I could see tears of frustration welling up in the corners of Mike's eyes.
What? Why?
He muttered, repeating himself as if in a trance, but after seeing my stern glare, he seemed to realize that nothing more he said would make a difference. Eventually, he walked away with slumped shoulders. Finally, I felt a weight lift from my whole body, and I was able to watch Mike's departing figure with a sense of relief. It might be slightly unfair to the child, but it's better not to have such a father. I'll make sure our child is happy. Once the baby is a bit older, I plan to go back to work, maybe dropping the kid off at daycare. Luckily, a former colleague from my old job has reached out, asking if I'd consider coming back. I look forward to the day I can return to work, but for now, I'll take each day at a time with my child.